Hi everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we're doing a very awesome interview with one of my best friends in medical school, Melina. She's also a second year student at UofT, and today we're going to learn a little bit about her pre-med journey and some tips she has for you guys. Okay, and just to get started, Melina, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, no, for sure. So my name's Melina, very evidently. Second year medical student at the University of Toronto with La. We recently got close to, we started out in badminton first year, and then, the rest is history. But I come from a science background. I was at Laurier University for 4 years, completing my health science degree, and then I minored in chemistry and in biology as well. And then I finished that, and then I started pharmacy school. When I was in pharmacy school, I also got admitted to medicine, and so there was a quick shift in gear there, and here we are today.
Awesome, thank you. So let me get the story straight. So you did your undergrad for 4 years at Laurier, and then you got into pharmacy school, and then did you apply like that year when you got in, so in your first year of pharmacy, and you got in the second year? Is that right? Or
so it's a little complicated.
Okay.
With medicine, the application process is about a year. So it ends in May, and so the new cycle starts in June.
Right.
The questions come out, and then the students brainstorm, and then you have to submit October 1st for medicine, and then you just go through the interview processes, and you do your Casper and everything in between, and the cycle again ends in May.
Yeah.
For pharmacy, the cycle starts a little bit, around the same time, but it ends a lot quicker. And so when I applied to medicine and pharmacy at the same time, I got into pharmacy, and I was fortunate enough to start at UW, which is University of Waterloo, in January.
Oh, okay.
Because for some odd reason, the program just starts in January.
Gotcha.
So I started in January. I did a full term there, which took me up until May. And then I got my acceptance to medicine, and I did not go back for my second term.
Got it. So you had a brief 4-month kind of pharmacy journey, and then before you got into medicine. Congratulations.
Thank
That's exciting.
you.
Okay. And so some just basic stats for you, if you don't mind sharing. What's your GPA? What's your MCAT like? If you took Casper, what is that?
So for my GPA, 4-year cumulative, I believe it was a 3.97. And then they took off the weighted GPA, so that is no longer applicable, unfortunately. So it tends to be your raw GPA for UofT, I believe. In terms of Casper, I wrote it a multitude of times. I wrote it, I want to say, maybe over 7 times, but that was some context. I'll give you some context. So I applied to medicine for 3 cycles. First cycle, I wrote it in French and I wrote it in English. And then second cycle, I wrote it in French and I wrote it in English again. And then for the third cycle, I wrote it in French, I wrote it in English, and I also wrote it for the States. And so I know a lot of people tend to think there's some variability in Casper. I personally didn't experience that. I scored 4th quartile for most of them. I think there was maybe a French version a couple years ago that I got 3rd quartile in. But other than that, it's been pretty standard and
awesome. And what about your MCAT?
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
MCAT, so that's a funny story. I wrote my MCAT the first time not for funsies, but I just wanted to get a feel for the process. And when I did, I ended up getting a 500 square, which equates to a 50th percentile. And so I was like, okay, you know what? This is a great start. I wrote it again the following year. So that was between my 3rd and 4th year? Yeah, my 3rd and 4th year. And I actually did worse. I ended up getting a 499. And no, sorry, the first one was a 503, and then the second one was a 499. And at that point I was devastated. I was like, oh my goodness, how could I have studied so much and put in more effort, allocated more study time, but have done worse? And in that moment, I just realized that I wasn't studying right. I didn't know my basic content enough. And because I didn't know my basic content enough, relying on practice just wasn't sufficient.
Right.
So I changed up my study tactics a little bit for the 3rd time around. I spent a month doing content review. And then after that, I spent the other 3 months just doing pure practice on UWorld.
Got it.
And that ultimately was fruitful because I ended up getting not a great score, but it is something, a 513.
Not bad.
So not bad.
Awesome.
Yes. And here we are.
That's great. And then it's good that you how you recognize that there was like maybe a lack of you know efficiency in the first time, and then change gears a little bit. So it was more so like a 1 month content and then like a 3 month practice. And would you say you would prefer, like if you were to give advice to people, obviously everyone have different study habits, but in a general, would you say like practicing for longer is probably more fruitful than studying for content?
Absolutely. I think it's important to know your content.
Yeah.
And if you don't know your content, then the practice ends up being very futile because you don't have the basic knowledge there.
Right.
So I think it's important to spend that first month really sitting down and honing in on the content that you don't know, especially if you come from a diverse background, right? That's not science-based. It tends to be a little bit more difficult to grasp some of the physics concepts or some of the chemistry concepts, which I struggled with physics so much. And so that month of content review, I had to do a lot more physics in-depth studying in comparison to like my biologies and my chemistries, because I had a good foundation in them from undergrad.
Right.
Spent an entire month doing that, and the practice came in really handy because the MCAT, as I'm sure many of you know, is not necessarily a black and white exam. It's a critical thinking exam, which essentially just means you are presented with a long stem and you have to read the stem and interpret it in that context, right? So it's not what you know or what you don't know, it's how you apply what you know. And it's really important to familiarize yourself with those types of questions because you're honing those critical thinking skills, right? And I think that's where the practice really makes a difference.
Absolutely. I personally find doing a lot of mocks for the MCAT really helped a lot.
Absolutely.
Do you have any good resources that you find helpful for other people?
So yes, I swore by the Jack Sparrows, I believe, the Anki deck for psych. That one, so for context, I ended up getting a 131 in psych, which is, I think the 98th percentile.
Yeah.
And I did not open any of the psych books. I was personally very weak in psych, but I did those Anki decks day in and day out. And it was fantastic. It was phenomenal. It gave you everything that you needed. So that covers the psych section. I think for your chemistry, that was a lot of books. The Kaplan books, I loved them. They were very simple, and I found that there wasn't a lot of jargon in them.
Right.
Gave me what I needed. And what did I use for chem? Oh, I think I probably used, what is it? The one that was for cars. Jack Weston?
Jack Weston.
Jack Weston. I did some like Jack Weston practice for that.
Okay.
But overall, for all of them, I cannot suggest this enough. And this is not a paid sponsorship, but UWorld. I could not have gotten as far as I did without UWorld. I didn't use it the first 2 times and my score reflected it. And then I got it the 3rd time around because part of me just couldn't justify the cost. Right. Especially with like the MCAT cost, the book costs, and like the bundle packages. And so I was like, no, I'm just not going to get UWorld. I'll be fine. Yeah. I was not fine. And then I got it the 3rd time around and it was a game changer. And their explanations are phenomenal. So. Awesome.
Yeah, there's like tons of different companies making these like mocks and question banks out there. So, you know, Melina really benefit from UWorld. I personally, there was another, I think it's Blueprint that I found really helpful as well. So I think the important thing here is to like keep trying different things and find the one that it's most helpful for you and that makes the most sense to you. And maybe it's UWorld for you, maybe it's like, I don't know, Princeton for you. So it depends on personal preference. And I think it's just, don't be afraid to try different things and kind of invest your money if you're financially capable to those things. Awesome.
I also think there's financial help for the MCAT. I think if you come from, I think there's a certain threshold of income, and if you are below that certain income, you can fill out a form. It does take a few months. I know a couple people who have gone through with it, and it's been fruitful. It just takes a few months, and you've got to provide a bunch of paperwork. And so if that's accessible to you, and you've got access to your parents' income and their tax filings, you could definitely submit for price accommodations, and that's a resource.
That's awesome. We'll link it in our page as well, just so people can access it. That's great. Now I want to shift your gear a little bit and go back to your undergrad at Laurier. Okay. What about the program? How do you find about it? Like, I want you to maybe share a little bit about, you know, is it like, can I get a good GPA if I work hard? Do I have time to do, you know, ECs and build my resumes, you know, in addition to getting a good GPA and that sort of, and how's the work-life balance kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. I personally loved Laurier. I loved everything about it, and every single high school student that comes to me and asks me, where should I go if I want to get into medicine? I always recommend Laurier. There's bias there, don't get me wrong. But the reason I recommend it is because the faculty is so supportive. Once they know you want to get into like pharmacy or medicine or dentistry, they will put in so much time and so much effort to give you the right resources. Even the chair of the department, like despite having very little time to do anything, they will check in with you. The only thing that you need to do is actually foster that relationship, right? Like you actually need to go to office hours and you need to be able to talk to them and be personable, right? Because otherwise they're not going to know to help you among, you know, the 150 other students. So I think it is really, really important to obviously go to their office hours and make yourself known to them. But it was really, I wouldn't say really easy to get a good GPA. It was easier to get a good GPA after what I've heard in comparison to like the students coming in from UW, where they were telling like they were working night in, day in and night out. Yeah. And so,
continue, please.
Slight interruption, sorry.
Day and night out.
Yes, day and night out they were studying, and me, for example, I found that there was a decent workload, but your peers are also very, very supportive. It is one thing that I found at Laurier. The community there was absolutely incredible. No matter where you come from, no matter what ethnic group you identify with, no matter what community you want to fit into, you will find your people. You will find your people. And I think that was, again, one of the things that I loved about Laurier. So the faculty, the people. I also think that they're very understanding of like fall throughs. Like if, you know, you got an assignment and you don't do as well and you go talk to faculty and you're like, hey, listen, like this was a really, really stressful time and whatever the situation may be.
They're more accommodating.
Absolutely. And they empathize with you. And they'll be like, okay, well, like how do we support you better? How do we, you know, make up this assignment, but with fairness? And so I think that was another really great aspect about Laurier. And because you could do that, you had the freedom to do extracurriculars. Laurier has 1,000,001 clubs that you can join, and there's something for everybody. There was a bunch of incredible committees that you can join too. I was part of the ALS committee, awareness committee, and then the Alzheimer's awareness committee. I had also started my own club, which is the brigades, were for the Laurier brigades, where we essentially just pooled our money together, had a bunch of fundraisers, and we'd send it out to the mother company. We had so many participants and it was incredible. And being able to foster those connections too with your peers and upper years provides you with mentorship. Right? Absolutely. And I think all of these together help you get to where you want to be. The people, the environment, and everything in between.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one big misconception, at least I held when I was in high school, was like, you gotta go into like the big university, like the well-known programs, like, and then that will help you a lot in terms of getting to medical school, but it's actually not the case because your program actually doesn't really matter as much as, you know, your GPA, your MCAT, your ECs, and your portfolio that you can present to the committee. So it's great that we have like a different perspective because I'm from Western, so it's like the classic pre-med program, but it's good to hear from like the other side of things. And do you also have like a smaller class size?
Absolutely. I think if I remember correctly, the class size was 150 to 175 in health science specifically.
That's awesome. That's really great. And you imagine UofT, they have like 1,000 students in one
program.
Oh my
goodness.
And it's hard to get support as opposed to like in the smaller program. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. You talk a little bit about your ECs and why you think they're impactful for you. And so I think one common when I held, at least in pre-med, is like, how can I make my EC stood out? Like, how can I, you know, everyone is competitive in their own ways. How can do I have to make them really unique? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think what I like to say is there has to be a certain degree of passion, right? You could be doing the same thing as the next person, but if you can talk about something so passionately, then that radiates through your application. That radiates when you talk about it in an interview, right? Whereas if you're doing something because you feel like it would look good, I don't know that you've enjoyed the experience enough to be able to eloquently speak on it and just be like, you know what, I would 100% do this again. And it might not shine as bright as someone who does it from the heart, you know? So my piece of advice is extracurriculars that mean a lot to you, extracurriculars that you truly are genuinely interested in, right? Because it makes it less tedious, it makes it significantly more fun. And I understand that, you know, research, for example, not always fun, right? But it's something that is encouraged. I wouldn't say it's needed. I would never say that it's like, if you don't have research on your application, you're not going to get it. Absolutely not. It's encouraged. And sometimes we are under the impression that we don't like research, right? But there's no way to know if you don't try. And it's okay to say, you know what, I tried research a couple times and it's just not for me. And you don't have to take it as a bad experience. You can actually take it as a learning opportunity. And that's what you could talk about in your interviews. That's what you could talk about in your essays. That's what you could talk about in like your ABS, right?
Yeah.
And I think that goes significantly further than someone who embellishes an activity.
Absolutely. Now you mentioned research. I'm gonna ask you
Yes.
a couple questions about research, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So did you have any research experience in undergrad? And if you say, like, if I don't have any research experience, should I be worried about it?
Right. So I did have a little bit of research experience, not a ton. I had no publications. I was not like a big shot ResearchGate guru. Furthest thing from it. I was actually doing little tasks here and there with the psychology department where I was administering surveys to students to kind of compare their mental health status pre and post COVID. I was also doing the effect of spontaneous focus on numerosity in children and how that could be a predictor of future mathematical skills or just preschool skills in general. And that project never actually went to completion, unfortunately, because when we had started, COVID had hit and then it got disrupted and we couldn't go back to the lab and it never really went through. And then I graduated and I reached out to the professor and they were like, you know what, no, it's okay. Like, we'll bring on other students. I said, you know what, like, it was a pleasure working on it nonetheless. But again, I got the experience, but it wasn't like the big shot publications. And so, yeah, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't be worried if, you know, you don't have that publication. I think it's important to get the experience. I think it's important to know that you like research or you don't. And if you don't like research, what is it that you don't like? Because that can open a multitude, that can open a multitude of doors, right?
Absolutely.
Whether you like qualitative, quantitative, whether you like QI.
So how did you get, exposed to, how did you get in, like, first touch of research? Because I know a lot of first year and second year students, at least I felt this way in first year. I don't know if it's because of COVID is making it worse, but it was like, it's so hard to reach out to professor and get a response back. And it can feel a little bit like a setback, like frustrated, like, do people not want me? Am I not competitive enough? So what's your tips on, like, securing a research position and, like, making that initial move? Because once you get that, it's going to be so much easier from down there.
For sure. I think we're all in the same boat when you kind of go into an undergrad program and you don't really know any of the faculty. What I did is I cold emailed. I literally downloaded a list of the faculty of science at Wilfrid Laurier and I cold emailed all of them about a research project that I liked that they were doing. And there were some projects that I really just wasn't interested in, so I would skip over those ones because it's like, I could never see myself doing this. But I just cold emailed and it worked for me.
Any tips for cold emailing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you cold email, the one thing I found that works the best and tends to get a little bit more responses is before introducing yourself, talk to them about their research. Tell them, like, I have read up on your research. I have seen the works that you've done recently in X, Y, and Z, and I've seen the publications that you've got on X, Y, and Z, and I find that so interesting. And then you can tell them, I have experience in this, or I have no experience in this, and I would love to kind of get that exposure. And then go ahead and talk about yourself. But talking about yourself first and introducing yourself, I feel like they start reading that and they're like, okay, I'll come back to this later. And then they never come back to it. So talk to them about their research, their interests, and then why you're interested in it, and then introduce yourself, I think is probably the best way to go about it. Some peers have found that going to office hours in the first couple weeks of school, making yourself known to them, and then fostering a relationship over like that first semester, and then, asking them, being like, hey, like, I'm really interested in research, or you talked about your research in our class, and I'd be so intrigued, like, are you taking students on as volunteers? That could be a great way to get your foot in the door. I will say paid research positions in first year and second year are very hard to acquire unless you have extensive research from like high school. But yeah, I think volunteer is probably music to their ears.
A good place to start.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. And another big component, or people are worried about the big components for pre-med or like applying for medical school, is like your clinical exposure. I know, Canada, we're not really strongly pushing for clinical exposures, but people still were like, should I volunteer at the hospital? Is that like a really helpful thing to do? Did you have any experience with that?
Yeah, so I did volunteer at the hospital for a little bit. I think I did it for 6 months, but it was never consistent. I did it for like once a week, once every other week, but it was very, very limited because I was like the front desk clerk. I was the one doing like a lot of the cleaning, a lot of like the directing, like, oh yeah, like just go up the stairs to the left. So I can't say that I got much clinical exposure there. I will say where I got most of my clinical exposure was working in pharmacy.
Right.
So I've been working in pharmacy since the age of 14, and that's where I got exposed to all of the medications, various comorbidities, and how you manage them. And I think that made me well versed in speaking to patients in like a very sensitive and a very understanding tone, because we saw a multitude of them, right? We saw patients that were so happy to be receiving care. We were seeing patients fighting addictions. We were seeing patients who just didn't even know where to go, had no family doctor, and were like, I need this monthly injection and I just don't know where to get it, right? So you just face so many barriers, and I don't think I ever would have gotten that exposure unless I had worked in pharmacy. Now, is clinical exposure a must in your application? Nothing is a must in your application. Like, you can tailor your application to whatever way suits you and makes you shine, right? However, when you're talking in your interviews, it provides you with really, really good experience to discuss. It provides you with a really rich perspective. And when you can integrate that perspective in your responses, it really, really shows a degree of clinical maturity. I'd like to put it that way.
Absolutely.
The more experience, the better, truthfully, in anything.
Absolutely. I personally didn't have a lot of clinical exposures before I got into medical school. At least after I submitted my application, I didn't have a lot of clinical exposure, but it doesn't really interfere with me getting to medical school, so nothing is a must. But like Melina said, if you had the opportunity and if you had the chance to do it, then it's a good way to see if you are potentially going to like what you're going to do in the future for your career. You mentioned pharmacy, and we're going to talk about that. You already know it. So pharmacy school versus medical school. I'm sure there's a struggle since you worked in a pharmacy for like 14, since you were 14. So I'm sure there's like a big struggle for a decision to be made.
Yes, absolutely. So, tough topic, I will say, because when I was in pharmacy, I was so set. I was like, this is what I really, really want to do. And I love it, and when I was kind of applying to pharmacy and transitioning into medicine as well, there was this new law that came out, the minor ailments law. I'm not sure if we're familiar with it, but essentially, I think as of December, they're actually adding more, or they already added more. Anyways, there was 8 or 9 conditions that now pharmacists could prescribe for. And that was like allergic rhinitis, and I think now there's acne on the list, and a bunch of other minor ailments that you no longer needed to see a primary care physician for. And that made the field of pharmacy significantly more exciting. Going into pharmacy school, however, I will say, we were learning a lot of content, and it was very useful content, but unfortunately the scope of pharmacy isn't as large as I believe it should be. I think pharmacists are extremely knowledgeable people, but I don't find that they practice to the extent of their knowledge. And to me, it just felt like there was a glass ceiling. There was a glass ceiling where you could only go so far, right? Once you've reached the maximum scope in Ontario, you couldn't do anything more. Unless you wanted to move to Alberta, because Alberta had less stringent, or till this day, they have less stringent rules, and pharmacists can do significantly more than the pharmacists can do here. And so if you were willing to move out to Alberta, then hey, by all means, that's a whole different playing field. But I think for here, it was just, I didn't want to feel like there was a glass ceiling. I wanted to provide patients with all-encompassing care, and I felt like in pharmacy I was very, very restricted in doing so. And I guess my goals didn't align with the profession. And I think that's why there was a little bit of a shift there.
And hopefully, things can change.
I hope so.
Are changing in the future that, pharmacists can maybe potentially get more access to the ability to provide care and, to just kind of alleviate the healthcare burdens that we have right now, not having enough physicians and healthcare workers.
And they know so much. They learn so much. And it's crazy that they could, off the top of their head, drug interactions, and they'll tell you what to prescribe, what not to prescribe. And I still struggle with that. We'll probably still struggle with that even when we're past residency.
20 years in our...
we're gonna be like, oh, didn't realize you're on that medication. But a pharmacist could look at it and be like, easily. Right? And
absolutely. And it can be frustrating if they can't do more.
Of course.
Okay, awesome. And I want to shift gear a little bit into your interviews. Actually, maybe let's talk about essays first.
Okay.
So any tips on the essays for UofT?
Passion. So I love the editing companies, I do, and this is nothing against them, but I think that when you go to an editing company, it at a certain point might make the essay slightly more generic.
Yes.
Right? I think they read so many, and every single person has a certain image of how an essay should be structured. And when you structure 100 students' essays in the same way, or you help guide them structure in the same way, it loses the essence of who you are.
Yeah.
So the first 2 times I applied, I got help from a company the first time, and then the second time I just got feedback from other peers.
Yeah.
And then the third time I actually wrote, not informally, but it was a lot more from the heart. I even used exclamation marks, and it was just more personable. And I think that that's what made my essay stick out.
Yeah.
I think if you speak obviously formally and you speak with intention, but you still are true to yourself and you can hear your own voice through the essay, then that's what matters. And when I say hear your own voice, I mean, if you could give that essay to somebody else and be like, read this, like, when you read that, can you hear me? Like, can you hear me saying all of these things? And if they say no, then maybe it lacks a little bit of a personal touch.
Yeah.
And I personally think that that's what made my essays. It was just me.
Got it. So
I know it sounds odd.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get what you're saying, but I just want to put it a little bit more straightforwardly, just so people, you know, if they start writing, like, how can I be more me kind of thing. It's a more so you're saying, like, the essay should be less like an essay, but more like a narrative, like you're building a story and you're writing about yourself kind of thing. So
great way to put it.
Yeah.
Great.
I just want to make sure, you know, if people say, like, you know, just be like you, but then you're like, how am I gonna start?
Right.
So opening maybe with like a very narrative, like a really drawing hook or something like that.
Absolutely.
Got it.
And end it on a high note too. And you can, your last character can be an exclamation mark. I truly think that that's what makes it memorable. Like, if you end on a high note and you put an exclamation mark, then it's like you don't forget that, right?
Yeah.
Or I personally wouldn't forget that.
Yeah.
So definitely a narrative.
Good. And it seems like you kind of applied the same thing for your interviews as well.
Yes, I did. It was very much storytelling. It was very much a conversation. So for UofT, obviously, there's no panel, right? It's I think it was Clara. What's the platform? Clara. I don't remember.
We'll put it on there.
Yeah, we'll put it on there. And it was just a one-way, right? You're talking to yourself. You've got 5 minutes. You just yap until you can't anymore. Obviously, if you have nothing to say, just stop. Just stop talking. But you're just talking to yourself, essentially. Got to make sure to look at the camera. But at the end of the day, don't like word vomit. You know, take your pauses, take your breaths. Laugh if you need to in the middle. If you said something funny, it's okay. Your laugh is probably contagious. So I think for UofT it was a little bit harder with the narrative because there was no one to give and take with. But for University of Ottawa, which is where I also interviewed, there was a panel, right? There was a pharmacist, there was a medical student, there was a member from the community, there was a physician, and they would take turns asking me questions. Right. And sometimes when they would ask me a question, I would answer it. I would actually ask them a question back, right? And like I saw I think it was the first year medical student. Yeah. He kind of was a little bit shocked. He's like, oh, like she's asking me a question. And I was like, I don't know if I messed up. I don't know if I did it. Needless to say, I was on the wait list, so do with that as well. But I think making it a conversation is always
the goal here.
A goal,
Yeah. Panel, absolutely. You want to try to make it a little bit more conversational and flowy. And for UofT, like you mentioned, we're speaking to a camera. Yeah. I personally find it really comfortable to speak to a camera. I like it more comfortable than I speak to like an interviewer because I don't like their facial expressions.
It's nerve-wracking.
Yeah,
it's so nerve-wracking.
I know. I just like the feedback. I don't want to see it. But I know some people really absolutely hate it speaking to a camera. So which type of person are you? And are you like, if you're the second type of person, how did you make it a little bit more like conversational based, more personal and less, you know, structured and like kind of like modeled? Right.
So personally, which one did I prefer? I definitely think I preferred the UofT interview more. Yeah. Because it was less stressful. Yeah. there was no one there. It was just me, myself, and I, and it was in my room, and it was essentially everything that I had practiced.
Yeah.
Right? You sat there, you gave yourself a prompt, and you just talked about it. You have structure, and no one was watching you. There was no additional stressor. The only thing that was stressful was their timer, but that was it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I enjoyed it, and I think I performed slightly better because there wasn't that additive stress. So that was that. If it is uncomfortable speaking to yourself, I think practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's okay to just sit in front of a blank wall, no computer, no nothing for starters, just a blank wall, and learn to converse. Just learn to speak. A great exercise, one of my mentors had told me, was random word generators on Google. You click it and you get a word. Talk about it for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Just to yourself. And if you can't do that, and if it gets awkward, then hey, just keep doing it for a week and you'll get better. And that's exactly what I did. Random word generator, learned how to like yap on and without repeating myself.
Yeah.
Right? And
That's a good
so
tip. Yeah.
that's what I did. And when I got to my interviews, it became easier to kind of have a conversation because I knew how to talk without being redundant.
Yeah.
Right? And I would make my jokes and I would just imagine that someone was there and I would laugh. I'd laugh sometimes and be like, but anyways, well, let's get back to topic. And it was as if someone was there, but they just weren't talking. They were just actively listening to me. So I think
that's a really good tip. I think it's very difficult to show your vulnerability, like, laugh a little bit, like stutter a little bit and get back to, like admitting that you're a little bit off track and go back. But I think that's also what makes your interview maybe stand out is because you're so like comfortable and then they feel like they're having a conversation with you and you feel really genuine if you just show your vulnerability a little bit. So I think that's one of the most difficult part of doing an interview that's like by yourself and asynchronous.
Yeah. And I think it takes practice. Another tip I got was, if you feel like you're stuck, take a sip of water. It gives you a solid 10 seconds to think about what you want to say next, right? And it keeps you grounded. Yeah. So take a sip of water, put it down slowly, and just restart again.
Absolutely. And I would say that all the props, the things that Melina mentioned, start doing that when you're practicing interview because it gets really awkward. Like, make it a habit, right? You don't want to be like, oh, like one day before an interview, I'm just gonna start drinking water, and it's not gonna help you because you're not used to it, and it just seems like so nerve-wracking. And then oftentimes I think that when you first start practicing, when you're stuck, you're kind of like, I don't want to take a silent pause because it's gonna be such a long, like a million years. But if you actually watch yourself back, like the recording, you'll actually see that the pause you make is actually nothing. Like people don't realize it, and you can probably make a longer pause of making it also seem natural. So that's a really good tip. Any structure for your interview answer at all? Like, we have different type of questions, like scenario question, personal question. People, online say like, oh, you should do this, do that. Did you have any structures when you were practicing your answers, or you just kind of like go with the flow?
I think I went with the flow.
Okay.
I think it was the exercise that really helped, like the random word generator that just really helped me to speak.
Okay.
And so I think what I tried to do every single time is answer the question directly. Yeah. For the first like 30 seconds, just answer the question directly because it's really, really hard to get lost in the conversation for 5 minutes straight. Answer the question directly, go on your tangents, and then after that, bring it back all together at the end to really, really drive home the point that I answered this question. Right? Because I think a lot of the times students will fall into the trap of going on 17 different ideas, and they're all so incredible, right? And they do relate to the question, but never actually answering the question in essence. Yes. And so I think that's just something to be careful for.
That's a good point.
The way to overcome it is you just answer the question in one sentence at the very start and then elaborate.
That's good. Yeah, I think it's like sometimes you try to think of like a million ideas and it's hard to pick from them. Just talk about 3 and you're like, which are the one they wanted to hear? Like I have trouble. Yeah, it's always but that's a good practice. Just answer it and then kind of elaborate based on what you have and go with the flow. But I'm sure you have sort of like a structure in your head, just kind of like, I don't want to, like firstly, secondly, do you use those words at all? Or
no.
Just, okay.
No.
Yeah.
I think I used a lot of like also.
Additionally.
Yeah, or like on a separate note.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of those filler words, but I think I tried to stray away from the firstly, secondly, and thirdly because it just
makes it a little bit structured.
Not even a little bit structured, it's just not in my vocabulary. So I think every time it's in my essay vocabulary, but it's not in my colloquial vocabulary. So when I would watch back those recordings and I would say firstly, I'd be like, girl, you're lying. Don't say that again. So
Yeah.
I just strayed away from them, and I couldn't make it look natural for the life of me. So I just didn't use them. But
So-
if they work for you guys,
Yeah.
go off.
Tips. If those are in your vocabulary, use them. If not, then use some words that are in your
Exactly.
colloquial conversation. That's very good. Awesome. So we're kind of like nearing the end of the interview a little bit. I just want to give you the question we asked everyone, just kind of like, if you were to go back in first year undergrad, or if you were to give someone entering university, what advice would you give if they want to pursue medicine in the future?
I would say be true to yourself.
Mm.
I think that's probably the best piece of advice I can give you, because it was really, really hard maintaining certain extracurricular activities that I had zero interest in.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's hypocritical me saying, oh, do follow your heart, when I didn't necessarily do that, but I think I learned the hard way, right? Because I would wake up on certain mornings and I would just be like, I don't even want to get out of bed. Like, this day is already horrible and it hasn't even started, right? And it was because I knew I had to go to certain activities that I really had no interest in doing.
Yeah.
I would go to certain activities and I knew I was just gonna go get yelled at that day, right? And like, not even by my preceptors or by my supervisor, no, but just by the people, right? And people that are passionate about those certain activities, they would thrive, right? But just for me, I didn't find enjoyment in them, and I found it really, really hard to get up certain mornings. And when you're having a hard time getting up in the morning, you have zero intention to study. You have zero motivation to study.
Absolutely.
Then your GPA takes a tank. And then after that, you're like, okay, well, I'm burnt out now.
Yeah.
And you just find yourself in a really, really vicious cycle.
Yeah.
I think do what you love. Yeah. And get out of your comfort zone. Because if you were in your comfort zone, then you're not learning.
Yeah.
Right? And it's okay to get out of your comfort zone and be like, I hate this. I never want to do it again. Fine.
That's okay.
Don't.
Yeah.
Don't do it again. But you know that you don't want to do it again.
Yeah.
But I think that's my biggest thing. Get out of your comfort zone. If you don't know how to do something, reach out to somebody, right? If you don't know anybody, if you don't know who to reach out to, chat. GPT is always your best friend now. They will tell you 1,000,001 ways to get something accomplished. But yeah, use your resources. Use your resources and do what you love.
Absolutely. I think one thing I get from the interview or the medicine application process is like, it's not really what you do that matters, it's really what you took away from it that matters. Like, you can be like a musician and you just everything is involved around musician, but if you talk about music and then you can connect it into medicine, then it makes an awesome application, or like even a unique application, right? And even if you're doing the most generic, like I did like mentorship with children, like that's like the most generic pre-med,
But you loved it.
but I wrote it on my essays and they loved it, right? So as long as you can write something and then you took away something really meaningful from it, like you said, then it makes it all so grand compared to something you hated and you're like, I don't know if I can talk a lot about that experience.
Yeah. And to like piggyback off of that, you talked about that in your essays. I counterintuitively wrote about my pharmacy experience for my long essay. And you would probably think like, why are you writing about your pharmacy experience when you're trying to get into medicine? Well, because it was a really impactful part of my life, right? It was a full 7 years, and there was a trajectory from where I started to where I ended, letting me know, okay, I do want to pursue medicine.
Yeah.
Right? And the readers are understanding. The raters are objective to a certain degree. And like, your passion radiates no matter what you write about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah. All right. Thank you so much for
Thank you for
chatting
having
with
me.
me today. And we'll link whatever the Melina's paid promos talked about, and so you guys can access that if you want to. And thank you again for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
That was so